Over the past several years, many of us have learned how incredibly life-threatening and dangerous viruses and diseases can be. They can cause any number of critical symptoms and can shut down your body's processes in a wide variety of ways. But there are more diseases than just the ones we can name off the top of our heads based on recent experience. Many of these have nothing anomalous about them, despite being incredibly strange. Take Progeria. It's a genetic condition that causes people carrying a very specific gene mutation to age rapidly. Not twice as fast either. So fast that most victims tragically don't live past their early teens. Or elephantiasis. If you're thinking that's a disease affecting elephants, you'd be wrong, but not grossly so. It causes the lymph nodes in your body to stop draining fluid correctly, so it pools up and makes your body parts swell to a massive size, until you look like an elephant. And of course, there's the nasty disease known more commonly as the bone growth disease, or the bone prison syndrome. When most people's muscle cells die, they get a nasty bruise, but no lasting damage. But for people with this rare genetic mutation, dead muscle cells ossify. They turn into bone. And muscle cells die slowly anyway, even if they're not damaged in any way. Over the years, sufferers have had their body gradually turn into solid bone. All strange and terrifying, aren't they? But none of them are anomalies, surprising as it may seem. They're all perfectly real diseases, documented by modern science. You can even search them up and see evidence if you don't believe us. But it begs the question, if these seemingly logic-defying and impossible diseases are just the ones known by modern science, then what kind of diseases break our understanding of science, physics, biology, and chemistry so much that they need to be categorized as anomalous? And, of course, contained by the Foundation. We have a few examples, the most notable of which is SCP-008, the fabled zombie plague, exactly what it sounds like on the tin. But today we're going to be looking at something else entirely. One of the many anomalous biohazards that the Foundation keeps in cold storage deep below the surface of the Earth, to ensure that they're never to infect another human being again. But this one is a little unique. When we talk about dangerous diseases, we always consider the outcome, the most danger a disease could possibly pose, to be death. However, our topic for the day doesn't do that. Frankly, death might be preferable to what it does to you. SCP-2376 has a nickname around the Foundation's medical department. They call it the scarecrow virus. That name alone raises a lot of questions. Usually diseases are named scientifically or according to the symptoms they give to anyone unlucky enough to be infected by them. But scarecrows aren't dangerous. They're not even alive. The simple little straw effigies that farmers stick in their corn and wheat fields so that crows don't pick their crops clean before they can be harvested. What do scarecrows have to do with a biological threat that the Foundation has decided is dangerous and anomalous enough that it must be contained? At least the wider world learn about it. Well, I suppose the only way to find out is by reading its documentation, which is honestly quite sparse. It's not the massive multi-page Goliaths that many entries can turn into. It's short, it's simple, and perhaps it's better that way. This is one of those cases where the more details you get, the more disturbing the anomaly is. But let's get into it. SCP-2376's object class is Euclid, which is at least a good first sign. It means that it's not too hard to contain, which in the context of a disease means that it's not amazingly communicative or contagious. That's good, all things considered. SCP-008 and SCP-610, by contrast, are incredibly communicative, and that's part of why they can be so hard for the Foundation to contain. The special containment procedures for SCP-2376 are a little odd. In fact, they barely reference SCP-2376 itself. Instead, they mostly refer to SCP-2376-1 instances, and how to care for them, feed them, communicate with them, and so on and so forth. They go into detail that SCP-2376-1 instances can't be fed normally, but by using an automated feeding system to limit human exposure to them. But they still need meticulous care. They have to be examined at least once every 8 hours by Foundation medical staff, and the discomfort that comes as a result of their infections is to be alleviated as much as possible. While precise, they're not exactly surprising. We know it's a disease, so it makes sense that these SCP-2376-1 instances are the victims of the disease, and as they're severely ill, they need to be fed and examined without making their condition, whatever it is, even worse or spreading it to staff. But they go on, and they get stranger. SCP-2376-1 instances can't actually be informed or made aware of the fact that the diseases they're suffering from. SCP-2376 is anomalous for some reason. They cannot be told about the anomalous properties of it. A text-based communicator for the disabled, kind of like the computer voice system used by Stephen Hawking, has to be used to communicate with the instances. But personnel can't just wait for them to type something out. They have to close and reopen their eyes every 5 minutes to see if they've typed anything out. For some reason, either victims of SCP-2376 can't move when they're being looked at, like the infamous SCP-173, or that people can't sense that victims have moved until they close and reopen their eyes. Either way, very anomalous, not to mention the fact that they won't or can't speak. The next line is a very hard, very firm rule though, not just a directive for care. Under absolutely no circumstances are patients to be removed from their rooms or disposed of. No removing from rooms makes sense. You don't want the disease to spread and cross-contaminate with the various other anomalies the Foundation's site has in its halls. Who knows what kind of superbug you might wind up with. But disposal is a different matter. The Foundation isn't allowed to get rid of victims of this disease. That seems obvious. The Foundation doesn't kill people if at all avoidable. Clearly something else is at play here. The next line gives a hint. Personnel have to follow any instructions given to them while treating instances, and have to be regularly reminded that they're treating a human being. Whatever this disease does to people, it causes others to not recognize them as human, and may accidentally dispose of them. All the instances/victims as well as samples of the disease itself are located at Site-234, and MTF Beta-7, the Maz Hatters, are to regularly investigate hospitals in the area with prior infection for repeat instances. Beta-7 is a mobile task force trained and equipped specifically to deal with contagious or infectious anomalies, a cross between soldiers and doctors. SCP-2376 is a substrain of the real-world tetanus virus, which is often called lockjaw. Most people get a tetanus shot in childhood that protects them from the disease, with regular booster shots so they never have to suffer through the grisly infection that's often found on rusty metal. Lockjaw is called that because the bacteria infects your muscles and makes them violently spasm, locking your jaw muscles into a closed position. There's no cure, and about 10% of cases are fatal. But the scarecrow virus is different. While tetanus is found on rusty nails, SCP-2376 is zoonotic. It's communicated and carried by animals, specifically the common crow. That sheds some light on the name. While it's carried by crows, it's transmissible to humans too. As we guessed, the unfortunate victims are designated SCP-2376-1 instances by the Foundation. SCP-2376's infection of humans consists of two distinct stages, Stage 1 and Stage 2. Stage 1 is, of course, first, and at first seems mild. It lasts between 1 and 4 weeks and has all the symptoms of the regular tetanus virus, like a fever, spasms, and loss of mobility, but with some extra ones. People also develop a reddish rash across their body, a cough, and vertigo. They become afraid of heights. That would be strange enough, but it also affects the senses. Victims who haven't progressed to Stage 2 yet complain about always smelling the odor of straw, corn, and other materials you'd find on a farm, even when they're nowhere near any farm. They say that everything they touch has a strange sort of film or texture on it, like rough burlap, the kind that you'd find a bag of potatoes to be made of. This is all certainly strange, but it's not something that you'd think must be contained by the Foundation, just an odd variant of the tetanus virus. But Stage 2 is when things really get complicated. The anomalous properties of the disease become readily apparent after the victim progresses to Stage 2. They stop being perceived as human. Anyone who looks at them only sees a regular, unmoving, inanimate scarecrow. It's not that they become a scarecrow either, just that people can no longer perceive them as anything but, which is arguably worse. Observers don't realize that the person they were looking at just a moment ago is suddenly gone or has been replaced by a scarecrow. To them, everything seems normal. They don't realize or question that anything's wrong. In fact, they can't even perceive any noises an SCP-2376-1 instance makes, like yelling or calling for help. That's why they have to use the text communication. But why the 5-minute delay? Because people can't perceive any motion by SCP-2376-1 instances either, at least not while looking at them. If one runs across the room right in front of an observer, they won't realize it, and will see the scarecrow still sitting where it started. But if they look away by turning around or closing their eyes before making visual contact with it again, the scarecrow will be in the position where the SCP-2376-1 instance stopped moving. The disease doesn't just affect the person who has it. Once Stage 2 sets in, it affects people who don't have it and have no exposure to it, besides looking at a victim. That's why it's anomalous. It manages to change how people's nervous systems and senses act while never even infecting them. SCP-2376 can't infect microphones or motion detectors either though. Any sounds made will still be picked up in a sound recording, and anyone tripping a motion detector alarm will have it sound immediately. That makes containment a little easier, now that the Foundation can depend on at least physics and sound. But then you'd think a picture or photograph of an SCP-2376-1 instance would look like a normal person, right? Albeit bedridden with a rash and spasming, but a human being. You'd be wrong. And same about videos. Visual media just renders the victims as what they appear to the naked eye, a regular, harmless scarecrow. There is one way to stop the effect that SCP-2376 has on perceiving its victims, but it's not pretty. When a victim dies of the infection, they can be perceived as a human again, though of course by then it is far too late. Thankfully, being infected by SCP-2376 isn't a death sentence. The parts and symptoms of the disease are shared with regular tetanus, can be alleviated with the same treatments and remedies, though they can't be fully cured. And even if all the other symptoms go away, the largest and most anomalous aspect, the effect on others' perceptions, stays. As of testing so far, there's no way to get rid of that aspect of the disease, except, of course, death. And the Foundation has performed extensive testing with samples of SCP-2376. Murine models, they infected lab rats with the disease to see if the reaction was the same as humans and how it compared to lab rats with tetanus. The answer was extremely similar. Just like tetanus, if an SCP-2376-1 instance was pregnant when they were infected, the disease would easily transfer to the fetus and give the baby the scarecrow virus from birth. And rats that went to Stage 2 also were perceived as scarecrows, tiny little straw-stuffed scarecrows shaped like mice and stuffed with denim and straw. But unlike humans, rats and mice eat straw, which is exactly what the non-infected rats began to do to the infected ones. They were unable to perceive the rat's cries or thrashing and cannibalized it. But SCP-2376 and tetanus are bacterial infections. By eating the infected rats, the other rats also became infected, showing the disturbed Foundation researchers how this disease managed to spread unnoticed. Protocols were immediately implemented to make sure rats and mice couldn't get into the containment chambers of SCP-2376-1 instances, lest they try to start eating them and spread the disease like wildfire through Site-234. Until the medical researchers can get a better understanding of what exactly SCP-2376 is and how it affects other mammals besides crows, people, and mice, testing is ordered to continue, and several other researchers have noted how similar the effects of the virus are to other anomalies, such as SCP-2316, a pathogen that causes the entire body to lock up and stop doing everything, and SCP-2218, a number of teleporting intelligent scarecrows. Maybe SCP-2376 is the result of these two anomalies coming into contact and interacting, as some of the researchers are investigating. Or maybe it's much more nefarious. Perhaps these anomalies share a common synthetic origin, like someone trying to create an anomalous biological weapon. Or maybe it really is just a coincidence. SCP-2376 was first encountered by the Foundation in the exact place anyone would expect to find straw and scarecrows, the wide, vast cornfields of Iowa in the United States. But they didn't find them in a field of wheat or in a barn. They found them where you'd expect to find disease victims. a hospital. More specifically, Foundation agents found a number of corpses stuffed into the garbage disposal units of the hospital of a small Iowa town. The nurses and janitors at the hospital had no idea what happened. They said that some teenagers had broken in during the night and dressed a number of scarecrows in scrubs before leaving them in the wards as a prank. The staff in the morning had found and disposed of them in the trash. Knowing what we know about SCP-2376, the actual story is much more tragic. Somehow, the infection had probably gotten into a human at the hospital, and the doctors began treating it the same as they would tetanus. The doctors and nurses had also got infected, and quickly entered into stage 2 while at work. But remember, victims stop being perceived as scarecrows when they die, which means that when hospital staff threw them into the trash, they were still alive. If you can call that alive. But their thrashing and yelling couldn't be perceived by the others. Once they went into the disposal units, they quickly deteriorated and died. A deeply tragic situation all around. But how did SCP-2376 get to the hospital? Where did it even come from? Foundation agents have a pretty solid theory. They scoured the local town for any strange events, incidents, or rumors about scarecrows, and found something much bigger than what they were expecting. A week before the corpses in the hospital were discovered, a man in the next town over had died, or more accurately, he had been killed. His wife called 911 incoherent and sobbing, and explained to the operator that she found a spare scarecrow in the garage a week before, and had nailed it up outside of the house on a post. After 3 days, she had walked outside and found, instead of the scarecrow, the body of her husband, at which point she broke down and called 911. The woman was tried for murder but acquitted on an insanity plea, based on her claims of her husband having turned into a scarecrow. The man's corpse was sent to the morgue at the hospital for an autopsy, which is probably how the infection spread to the other hospital staff. But not before the autopsy was completed and a report filed indicating cause of death: dehydration from being out in the hot sun for 3 days. Foundation staff quickly moved in and quarantined the body, confirmed the presence of SCP-2376 in the blood, and the wife confirmed her husband had symptoms similar to tetanus a few weeks ago. As for how the infection got into the man, that remains a mystery. The outbreak was considered contained by the Foundation, and since then there have been only cases here and there throughout the American Midwest, until now. An addendum to the file indicates that the Foundation has located and identified a new strain of SCP-2376, the key difference being the carrier and the effect. Rather than crows, it is transmitted by pigeons, and its origin point is in the highly urban location in Illinois. More likely than not, it's in the third largest city in the United States, Chicago. And the second difference is that instead of scarecrows, the infected are perceived as inanimate mannequins, the kind you'd see in any clothing or department store. Based off the vastly increased risk for the epidemic, the Foundation's medical department have requested that SCP-2376 be reclassified to Keter. SCP-2376 goes to show how even the diseases we don't know exist can be dangerous in more ways than just threatening our lives. So next time you see a crow scavenging for food in your front lawn, maybe think twice about getting too close to scare it away. You might just wind up on a pole in the same front yard, scaring crows away in your new straw-stuffed overalls forever. Now go check out SCP-1025 Encyclopedia of Common Diseases and SCP-610 The Flesh That Hates for more on anomalous diseases that will leave you crawling in your skin.